So since I started making content on YouTube, I started to get a lot of questions from people, both in person and on social media, asking me my opinion on Bitcoin. All right. What I think about it, what my opinions are besides the price, and my overall thesis on it in the next 10 to 15 years. All right. We're going to talk about the problems that Bitcoin solves, the problems in the current economy, I should say, how Bitcoin solves these problems, and why I'm still so bullish on Bitcoin and the entire crypto market going into the rest of this decade and leading into the next decade. Okay, we're going to break all that down today. It might be a long video. I'm not sure how long it's going to be, but we're going to break it all down right now. But before I do, I need to let you guys know that nothing in this video is financial advice. I'm not your financial advisor. I'm not your financial counselor. What you decide to do with your money is up to you, and you need to take responsibility for your buys and your sells. Okay. With that being said, let's get into the video. All right. So the first thing that we need to talk about, you guys, is we're gonna break this down, I think, into three parts. All right. We're gonna talk about the problem around the world. All right. How Bitcoin is the best solution to this, and my thesis on Bitcoin and where I think it's heading, and the possible price targets that I see Bitcoin hitting in the next 10 to 15 years. All right. Even 5 years, depending on how fast things go. Okay. And I think we need to start with the fact that we need to just start with a fact that people who are anti-crypto need to accept. Okay. And that's that Bitcoin has outperformed every single asset in the history of mankind. All right. There's never been a product, or there's never been an asset that has done so much price performance in such a short a period of time. Okay. And I see a lot of people confused by this. I see a lot of people not understanding Bitcoin and understanding its price potential. And for you guys that don't know, Bitcoin used to be pennies. Bitcoin was pennies in the beginning. It was, less than $1. It was less than $10, less than $100. And now it's floating at $88,000, in a little bit more than 15 years of it being out. Okay. Bitcoin's not that old. It's a brand new asset, yet it went from less than $1 to sitting right now at around $88,000 to $90,000, and it got up to $110,000 earlier this year. Okay, so that's nothing to sneeze at. But I think a lot of people are very confused as to why this is, and so this is what this video is for. Is I'm going to break this down for you as well as give you my opinion. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do, you guys, is we need to talk about what Bitcoin is. And what Bitcoin is essentially sovereign money. All right. I could get into the details. I can get into the technical details. I can get into how Bitcoin works, maybe in other videos. But for this video, what essentially Bitcoin is, you guys, is it's sovereign money. It's money for the sovereign. It's money for people who want to maintain their purchasing power over time, yet stay liquid, yet stay sovereign. Okay. Now, what is money, right? What is money? Money, you guys, in its simplest form, is energy. All right. More specifically, it's the time and the energy of people. Okay. If you go out and you have a job, let's say you have a job and you work 8 hours a day. All right. Let's say you get paid by the hour or by the contract. Let's say it's $250 a day per contract, or you make $40 an hour, or whatever it is, right? Now when you guys go out and you guys make that money, that essentially is your time and your energy or your labor, and they give you that in return for your time and energy and labor. Okay, so that money represents that time that you spend. All right. Now, depending on the problem that you solve and how much value that you're creating, that dictates in most cases how much you get paid. All right, and that's essentially what money is in its simplest form. All right. Now, I think the first thing that we need to understand about the money that we see as today, which in most cases is dollars or government currencies, okay, the first thing that we need to do is we need to understand that those dollars and those government currencies are not backed by anything. Okay, those dollars and currencies are essentially pieces of paper that the government says to you, and there's a social consensus around the world where people agree that those things are valuable. Okay, those things are valuable, and that's why people accept they accept those forms of payment, right? You want to go get a good or service, you have to go and you have to get dollars, or you have to go and get a government currency, and you need to exchange those dollars for that good or service, right? Now, the reason why I said that it wasn't backed by anything is because that's not the way it always was, right? The way it was before 1913 is that a certain amount of dollars were paired to a certain amount of gold. Okay, gold, which was the scarce asset, the dollars represented essentially gold. All right, and then in the 1970s, the 1980s, this time period, the dollar completely got off the gold standard, which means that the relationship between scarcity and dollars were no longer a thing. All right, which means that the government, the U.S. government, in the example of dollars, could essentially just print infinite amounts of dollars, and it doesn't have to be backed by any type of gold reserve or anything like that. Okay, so that's very, very important. Okay, that the dollar was taken off the gold standard officially in the 70s, and later on throughout time, it got further and further away from scarcity. Okay, now this goes into because of this, right? Because of this. People then realize that once the governments can create infinite amounts of currencies, there needs to be a solution for this, right? Saving your money isn't the best solution anymore, which is why investing is a thing. Okay, now you can invest to just offensively invest or defensively invest. I've talked about that in previous videos, but investing in general, whether it be offensive or defensive, the overall goal of this, you guys, is to outpace inflation and ideally increase your purchasing power. Okay, holding cash in 2025 destroys your purchasing power if you hold it long enough. All right. Now, in an economic cycle, there is a time to hold dollars and to be cash is king. And in certain parts of an economic cycle, it makes more sense to hold assets, scarce assets, ideally, and assets that not everybody bought. Right. But with that being said, in most cases, although there is a good time to hold cash at a certain point, in general, if you hold assets over long periods of time, you increase your purchasing power, or at least maintain it depending on what you're buying, and you outpace inflation, right? So that's the purpose of investing, which is to the dollars that you make. All right, there's two ways to beat inflation, right? It's to make more money, and it's to multiply the money that you already have. All right, and investing is essentially that second one. And that's the goal. Okay. Ideally, you guys are working on both of those things, getting your money up and also making the most of the capital that you already have. Okay. Now, because the governments can print infinite amounts of currencies, right? This becomes a problem because that means that the dollars that the government prints aren't as scarce, right? So over time, the more circulating supply that there is of dollars, the more M2 there is in the economy, the more of other things go up, because in most cases, the production amount or the production velocity of goods and services don't keep up with inflation. Okay. Now, let's say that goods and services were produced to the same degree of inflation, right? Let's say the production of goods and services go up to the same degree that inflation does, then the prices and the purchasing power shouldn't really change, right? But the problem is that they don't, because the government prints unbelievable amounts of currency, all right? They print unbelievable amounts of dollars, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse, all right? It's getting worse, and there's nothing that any politician can do to stop that, all right? I like Donald Trump, but Donald Trump can't solve this problem, you guys, all right? This problem was started 40, 50 years ago. Before Trump was in office, no government politician will be able to solve this problem for you, okay? The government is operating in a deficit, and there's nothing that any politician can do about it at this point. At this point, it's pretty much too far gone. Not just the U.S. either. All these other governments are also bankrupt, and they're all lending and borrowing with each other, but all of them are in debt, right? Basically. All right. So let's break down inflation a little bit more and understand how money is created. Okay. Now, there's two main ways that money's created. All right. There's a lot of jargon out there. A lot of people have a lot of theories, but this is actually how money is created, you guys. All right. The first way is by the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Mint just printing the money. All right. Now, the Fed, some people argue that the Fed can't print money. They can. All right. The Federal Reserve can print money. We saw that in 2008 when there was a global financial crisis, right? And the Fed, at the end of the day, they were able to buy the long-term bonds in order to prevent essentially worse things from happening. They were able to print money. All right, they were able to print money, and they can do it whenever they want. All right, and also through executive order and government action, the Federal Reserve will print money. Okay, and the second way that the second way that money is created is by banks lending them into existence. All right. So let me give you an example of this. So let's say I go to a bank. Let's say I'm an institutional investor. I request a loan from a bank, right? Let's say the bank gives me 5%, right? Now, let's say that the Fed funds rate is 4%, as an example, right? I will request a loan. The bank will request a loan from the Fed, and the Fed will give them a loan on 4%, and then they'll give me 5%. The bank makes 1%, right? So that's how the banks make money. They're the middleman essentially between me and the Fed, and basically that's how money is also created, by lending it into existence. And the banks are the ones who are able to lend it into existence. Okay, so if there's more loans being created, because interest rates, in most cases, if interest rates are lower, that means there's more people that are trying to borrow money, and the Fed can do that. Okay, if the bank requests a loan, the Fed prints the money, gives it to the bank then gives it to me, and then the bank makes the middle. Okay, so that's essentially how money is actually created. Okay, that's actually how it's created, right? Now, what's the problem with this, right? What's the problem with this? All right, it sounds like everybody's winning. You know, I get the loan, the bank gets the middle, and the Fed is able to just print infinite amounts of money, right? Well, I guess the people who are buying things don't win in that situation. But guys, the problem is that you don't get access to that capital first, right? You don't get access to the capital first. The banks get access to the capital first, and by the time it gets circulated to consumers and people and everyday people, the problem is that by the time that they get that money, by the time that money is circulating, because remember, the banks are borrowing a lot of money in order to buy assets, right? That's the other thing. And then by the time that money gets trickled down to the person, inflation has already killed their gains, right? Inflation has already killed, there's no gains, but by the time they get the money, those dollars are worth so much less than if they were able to get it fresh off the printer. Okay, the only people who win in this situation are the people who get the money fresh off the printer. If they get the money fresh off the printer, then that means that they can put that asset to work, and then consumers can consume those things that loan buys, and then they get rich, they get wealthy. Wealthy people are people who own assets, okay? And the people who consume and the people who don't have access to the capital first, they end up getting destroyed by inflation if they don't invest their money and if they don't increase their income. Okay. So the other thing that we need to talk about, you guys, is that with this idea that the government can just print money, which they can, right? The governments operate on a deficit, right? It's not like these governments are profitable operations, okay? All of these governments are essentially bankrupt, all right? And the only reason why they're able to stay afloat is because they can print money, right? The only reason why they can stay afloat is just because they can print the currency that everybody believes is valuable, okay? Think about it like this. If me and you, let's say you were operating, let's say you're budgeting, just like a normal budget, okay? And you were operating on a deficit for a long time, eventually you're going to get kicked out of the place that you stay. Eventually you're not going to have any food, and eventually you're going to run into huge problems if you don't budget correctly, right? If you operate on a deficit for a long enough time, you can take out a loan, you could run a credit card up, but eventually that Ponzi ends. Eventually you have to, the piper gets paid, right? With the government, that's not necessarily the case, because they could just print the currency that everybody believes is valuable, right? That's the thing. They can print the currency that everybody believes is valuable, and so therefore they don't really, they can kind of get away with it a lot more. Okay, now this is to the expense of consumers and everyday people, because with that government printing comes an increase in M2. With M2 becomes the dollar over time becomes less and less valuable in most cases. All right, especially compared to say scarce assets. All right, which is why you see Bitcoin outperforming the dollar so aggressively. Okay, so in order to pay for their expenses, the government prints money. Okay, because they don't operate on a deficit. They do take some tax money, but the tax money doesn't make up for everything that they spend. The governments overspend a lot, and so in order to pay for that, they print the money. Okay, and all the governments live in debt. All right, all governments essentially live in debt, and in order to refinance that debt when that debt comes to mature, they have to print money. Okay, so essentially what I'm trying to say is that the government, like we'll use the U.S. government as an example, because I think most of my guys watching this video are U.S. Okay, so we'll use the U.S. government as an example. All right. Now the U.S. government has two options of what they can do. All right, they can either continue to print money and erode people's purchasing power, or they can default. All right, or they could just say, hey, we're not going to print any money. We don't have the money. We're just going to default on all of our debt, and nobody's going to get paid, and we default, and then whatever happens after that. All right, that's not going to happen. All right, the U.S. government is not going to default on their debt. They only care about, at the end of the day, maintaining their status as the empire of the world, and they're going to do whatever it takes to be able to do that, even if it means printing a ton of money and eroding your purchasing power so that you buy less stuff. Okay, there's no way that the United States government is going to allow a default. Okay, so essentially they're pinned up in a corner and they have to print money. And people who have recognized this, such as myself, I'm kicking my feet up and I'm saying, and I'm just looking at, I'm looking at the situation and I'm saying, you have to print money. I know you have to print money. So print money so that my assets that I buy go up, right? My assets go up and I'm not getting killed by inflation. All right. You guys, none of my guys are losing to inflation, right? We're kicking the shit out of inflation, right? We're kicking the shit out of inflation because we recognize the problem, right? We understand that the government has to print more currency units in order to stay afloat, and we take advantage of that, all right? Similar to Wall Street talking bad about Bitcoin, talking bad about crypto for a long time, and now look at what's happening, right? They're buying our bags, right? They're the ones who are coming and they're starting to invest into our Ponzi because they recognize that this isn't going away, and the problems that crypto solve are very, very good problems to solve, and it's just going to continue to get bigger. And now Wall Street and BlackRock and everything like that are buying our bags, right? How often do you see that? Most of the time, Wall Street gets involved in things first, such as AI, such as other things, because they have insider information and they also are able to just get access first, all right? But in crypto, that's not the case, right? In crypto's case, Wall Street's buying our bags, right? Wall Street is buying our bags, and we're going to be dumping on Wall Street because Wall Street was late. Part of that is because of regulations as well, all right? But they went on publicly and said that crypto, like Bitcoin's a scam, Bitcoin's a Ponzi, Bitcoin's not backed by anything, whatever. And now look at them all, right? Now look at them all. Now they're all buying our stuff, right? So that's essentially the problem with the current situation. All right, I want to talk about how, now let's talk about how Bitcoin solves this, right? How does Bitcoin solve this? And I think the best and easiest way to do this is to break it down with supply and demand, all right? So we'll talk about the supply of Bitcoin, and then we'll talk about the demand and why Bitcoin is in demand and why the price of Bitcoin has went up so much, right? The first reason is because Bitcoin is scarce, so that we're going to touch on the supply, right? There's only 21 million Bitcoin out, all right? Even though the government currencies can print infinite amounts, Bitcoin is, for the most part, guaranteed to be 21 million. It's not necessarily guaranteed. It could change, but it most likely 99% chance that it's probably going to stay at 21 million, at least for the very, very, very distant future. Okay, so Bitcoin is 21 million BTC. There's no more. There's no less. Once 21 million BTC is mined, there's no more. All right, there's no more. And the thing is, you guys, is with that, if dollars, which are printed by the government, like we talked about before, will always get destroyed, all right, in terms of performance by scarce assets such as BTC, all right. And now maybe if you cherry pick time frames, maybe if you go from 2021 to 2020, the bottom of 2022, then you could say, oh look, the dollar beat Bitcoin. But if you now what I say to those people is, why don't you zoom out on that chart, right? Why don't you zoom out on that chart, and you can see that Bitcoin, if you look on the trajectory, it's up and to the right, straight up and to the right. Like I said before, went from less than $1 to over $100,000 in basically 15 years, all right, 16 years, however you wanna count it, right? So if you look at it, Bitcoin is up and to the right versus dollars, because the supply of dollars is constantly expanding and the cap supply of Bitcoin is constantly staying the same, all right? So that's the first thing, is the supply, right? Now, scarce assets with demand will always be able to outperform government currencies that get printed a lot, all right? So let's talk about another benefit of Bitcoin, right? Is that it's digital, all right? A lot of people don't like this. A lot of older boomer investors, or people who don't understand technology very well, or they don't understand Bitcoin at all, is they'll say that Bitcoin's not backed by anything. It's intangible, right? It's intangible. And what I'm going to argue is that intangibility is actually an advantage. Intangibility is actually an advantage. I'm going to say that again. Intangibility, and it not being backed by anything, is an advantage, not a disadvantage. Okay? Why? Now, why is it an advantage? Well, the first reason why is that it's fast and light. All right? If you want to travel across the world, you don't need to carry airplanes of gold. I'm going to use gold as an example here, because we're going to get into that a little bit more. All right? If you want to move, if you want to travel, and you want to take your Bitcoin, you could take it very easily, right? You could take it easily. All you need is your keys. You don't even need your device. All you have to do is just have your keys, and you can access it from any device, as long as you understand how to redeem it and you have access to the internet, right? And you don't have to get on a plane. It can't be confiscated, essentially. I mean, basically it can't be confiscated. Even if they tried to confiscate it, it would be very, very difficult to do that, unless they would have the seed words and they did it by force, right? But with gold is tangible, gold is physical, and therefore it's a lot easier to confiscate, and it's a lot heavier, okay? It's a lot heavier to move around, all right? If you wanted to send, as an example, $50 million across the world, and you wanted to use gold, guess what you're gonna have to do? You're gonna have to get airplanes full of gold, or you're gonna have to get an airplane full of gold, and you're gonna have to send that. That's airplane expenses. That is paying a pilot. That is loading the gold in general, and then that's also not taking into account the risk of it not getting there immediately, right? Now let's compare that with Bitcoin. Bitcoin, you could easily send $50 million with nobody's permission, because it's distributed ledgers and it's a decentralized, and you could just send the money and it'll be in the person's wallet in 30 minutes, max. It could be faster than that, right? Yep. All the confirmations, as long as the confirmations go through, which it should, because it's all essentially trustless, right? You can send that pretty quickly with no friction. Whereas gold, there's a lot of friction. Try to do that with a bank account. If you try to send $50 million overseas across the world, the bank's going to call you like they're your kid, or like you're their kid, and they're going to say, "Hey, what is this transaction? We need to. We're essentially your financial daddy, so we need to make sure that what you're doing, we approve of what you're doing. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to send it, and we're going to freeze your account." Right? Does that sound like a sovereign individual holding all your money not only in government currencies that the government prints and you can't print it, but then on top of that, they can do that? Does that sound like a sovereign individual to you? Does that sound like an adult? I don't think it does, right? I think if you want to be an adult, you have to have sovereignty and you have to have control over your own money, right? And that's what Bitcoin does, okay? That's what Bitcoin does. And you can't do that with pretty much anything else. So that's a big problem that Bitcoin solves. Believe it or not, you guys, maybe it's not important for you, but there's a lot of people around the world that really, really value that. Okay. And it depends on where you live, and it depends on what you're trying to do, and how much money and how much capital you have and who you're doing business with. But that's an important problem to solve for a lot of people. And a lot of people with a lot of money really want to solve that problem, right? So that's just something to keep in mind there. All right. I touched on this a little bit, but Bitcoin is decentralized. There's no centralized ledger. All right. There's no one central entity controlling it. All right. I'm not going to get too much into the ethos of Bitcoin or whatever it is, but essentially we'll keep it simple. It's distributed ledger technology. All the miners and all the nodes operate the network. Nobody knows who they are. All the miners are working together in order to secure the network as well as process transactions. Okay. Process the transactions, make sure that the blockchain or the ledger is working as intended. And there's miners all over the world, and anybody can be a miner. Okay. So the network is very, very secure. All right. No one can freeze your funds if you run your own node. That's the other thing. We'll get into, I don't want to get, like I said, I don't want to get too techie, but if you run your own node on Bitcoin and you run your transactions through your node, nobody can freeze your funds. You can send it without anybody's permission. All right. Nobody can tell you that you can or can't send money to anybody or anything. You own that money. It's yours, and nobody can tell you otherwise. All right. Okay. So you are your own bank when you have Bitcoin and you use crypto. All right. You are your own bank. Now that comes with more responsibility as well, but I mean, it just depends on how sovereign you want to be. If you want to be your own bank, there's a lot of benefits to that. All right. There's more responsibility, but there's also a lot of benefits, and it's very lucrative. Okay. So you can move around and be more flexible. If you have Bitcoin, you can be very, very flexible with where you want to live, with the lifestyle that you want to have. If you need to, if you want to, if you want to send money to somebody, you can do it whenever you want. You don't need anybody's permission. Nobody's going to be, freezing your money or whatever the case may be. Okay. An example of people freezing your funds was in Canada. For you guys that remember during COVID, the truckers in Canada didn't want to get the COVID jab. I don't want to get too much into COVID because I don't want to get banned or whatever. But basically, those truckers went out and protested, and what did the Canadian government try to do? Right? The Canadian government tried to freeze their funds through their bank account. Right? That's how they control you. And the other thing that you guys need to realize too is that if you don't want to be controlled, then you have to have control of your own money. Okay? If the government or the banks or whoever wants to control you, if they can control your money, they essentially can control your actions and your behaviors. Because if they can control your money, that means if you don't have access to your money, then you can't eat, you can't survive, you can't do anything without your money, right? So if you have control of your own money, then they don't have control over you. But if you let them have control of your money and you want to be their financial baby, right? Then if you do something that they don't like, whatever it is, then they can freeze your money and they can control you, right? They can control you and you're not a sovereign individual. Okay. Now, does that mean that you don't have any bank account? I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a bank account. Banks they can make life easier for certain things, but that's up to you how much you want to be in the banking system. Okay. But I will say that if you leave all your money in a bank and you don't have any sovereignty or control over your money, then they are in control of you. Okay. And whatever changes in the future happen, social credit scores, political things that can happen, whatever, if they control your money, they control you. Right. So that's important to talk about as well. So those are the benefits of Bitcoin, right? I touched on the supply. I touched on the demand and what it solves. All right. I talked about inflation and how Bitcoin solves that inflation problem, right? So what's my thesis, right? What's my thesis on Bitcoin? Why do I think that Bitcoin will continue to do very, very well and outperform all traditional assets? All right. Is that, okay. So let's start with that. Bitcoin is in its adoption curve. Okay. Bitcoin's still a baby. All right. Bitcoin's only 15 years old. A lot of people think that it's this big, known thing. It's really not, guys. Only 8% of people are in crypto in general. All right, 8% of the population are in crypto in general. That's such a small amount of number. If that doubles, especially if they're bigger players, even if it gets to 16%, these prices are not the same. They're a lot higher than they are right now, okay? So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that Bitcoin is still in its adoption curve, all right? And that's why Bitcoin is so volatile, because so little people understand it. And all volatility is essentially just the market or market participants trying to figure out the fair price of the asset, right? And that's why you hear people saying it's so volatile, it's too volatile. A better way to put that is that it's just new and it's misunderstood. And so people are trying to figure out the fair value. But we know the overall trajectory, right? We know the overall direction that Bitcoin's going, and it's up and to the right. And if you zoom out on the chart since 2010, 2009, that's exactly what you see, right? And that's going to continue to happen because a lot of these problems are not going to be solved and they're going to get worse, all right? So the world's moving more digital, all right? Bitcoin is essentially digital gold. It's a store of value, all right? Bitcoin does the same thing that gold does, but in my opinion, it does that problem better. Now, there are benefits to gold. It being tangible has its own advantages as well as disadvantages, which I touched over before, right? But, in terms of money, in terms of sovereign money and money outside of government currencies and stores of value, having a digital version of gold is very, very good. It's very, very useful, especially since the world is moving more digital over time, all right? And the governments still need to be, the governments can't stop printing money, right? Like I talked about before, unless they want to default, which they're not going to do, all right? The governments need to keep printing money in order to stay afloat, all right? So the scarcity aspect of Bitcoin is also a problem that's not going to be solved anytime soon either, all right? That's not going to be solved, right? So the demand for Bitcoin will only increase most likely as this happens over time. Now, I'm not saying there's not going to be corrections. I'm not saying there's not going to be bear markets, but overall the trajectory is that the governments will continue to print money and scarce assets that are innovative, such as Bitcoin, will keep going up, all right? That solve problems, all right? Now, Bitcoin is better than gold, all right? Bitcoin is better money than gold is. I don't care what any of the gold bugs say. I don't care if you guys comment on my videos. I don't care if you guys want to say that Bitcoin's not backed by anything. I don't give a fuck, all right? I really don't, all right? Bitcoin is better money than gold. It solves the problem better, all right? Gold, there's nothing wrong with gold. The problem with gold is that people have been trading gold for thousands of years already. It's very heavy, and the gold market is manipulated a lot. There's a lot of paper gold out there. And the prices are already very, very heavy, all right? Everybody already bought gold, and I just simply see that Bitcoin, although gold has very good principles to it, very similar to Bitcoin's principles in terms of economics, Bitcoin solves the problem a lot better, all right? And also not as many people bought it, all right? So my thesis is that Bitcoin will continue to outperform gold, which is, I would say, it's the closest competitor to Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin, with the world moving more digital, with it being so new and not everybody already having exposure to it, Bitcoin will continue to outperform gold in terms of percentage returns. And eventually it's 2025 right now, by 2035, by 2040, Bitcoin, I believe, will be 1-to-1 parity with the market cap of gold at that time, okay? 1-to-1 parity in market cap, which means that it's just as big as gold. As the world moves more digital, I think that parity will continue to get thinner and thinner. Before, it was like this, it was like unbelievable. It was like the whole screen, and then over time, it's just gotten thinner and thinner and thinner. Maybe it's here right now, and I believe that gold and Bitcoin will get 1-to-1 parity over time, all right? I'll say 10 years, let's say, right? Now let's do the math on that, right? Let's do the math on that parity, right? If Bitcoin and gold get 1-to-1 parity in market cap, now let's just do the current market cap of gold, right? Let's just do the current market cap. Now gold's going to increase in price too, because gold is also scarce, and gold also solves other problems, and it is a store of value, right? So gold will increase, but let's just look at the current market cap of gold, all right? Let's just look at the current market cap of gold, which is 18.5 trillion, all right? 18.5 trillion market cap for gold, all right? If Bitcoin with 21 million coins, if Bitcoin reaches parity, 1-to-1 with gold, all right, that puts Bitcoin's price at $880,000. all right? If Bitcoin gets 18.5 trillion market cap, you divide that by 21 million Bitcoin, that's what you get, 880,000 Bitcoin. Because the way to calculate market cap is to do the price times the circulating supply. And if the circulating supply is 21 million and the price is 880,000, that would put it at 18.5 trillion market cap, all right? And that's current gold's market cap. So assuming gold would increase, let's say gold doubles in the next 10 years, which is totally possible, that would put Bitcoin above $1.6 million for one Bitcoin, all right? Now, that's totally possible to happen over the next 10 to 15 years, 2035, 2040. Let's say you're 25 years old, you're 40 years old. I think that's pretty likely to happen, all right? Sounds crazy, but it's not really crazy seeing all the price performance that Bitcoin's already had. And I just broke down why that is, why Bitcoin solves the problem, and why the demand has increased, and why Bitcoin is the best performing asset that's ever existed, and why that trend will continue most likely. And then hence, I'm talking about Bitcoin right now, but the crypto market in general, not just Bitcoin, is going to innovate, and that's going to be opportunity too, right? So the current market cap of gold, if Bitcoin reaches parity of just the current market cap, that would be $880,000 Bitcoin. And if the market cap of gold doubles, right, that would put Bitcoin at 1.7 million dollars per Bitcoin, which is, I really believe that that will happen. All right. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you guys enjoyed my thesis. I hope you guys gained value from this. Hopefully I gave some clarity to people who are asking me about Bitcoin and what my opinion is on it. All right. So I hope you found this well. 37-minute video I just went on for. That's crazy. Time flew. All right. I hope I didn't even think about that. But 37-minute video as of right now. All right. I'm going to cut it short here. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys want to follow me on Instagram, you guys want to follow me on TikTok, Chase Your Grace, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the notification bell, like the video, save the video, all right? And leave a comment on what you guys think. I'm curious to know what you guys think and what you guys want to see me talk about next, and what your opinion about my opinion is, and what your opinion about my thesis is. I'm curious to know, all right? So thank you guys. Jump in the block, free Telegram group, link down in the description. All right. I hope you guys have a good day or night, wherever you may be, and bless up. Thank you.